all. And with that, I want to welcome Mr. Bob Chapman to the show. Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and for the very nice commentary. And I guess I can equate retirement with being retarded. If you don't use it, you lose it. And boy, that's a mouthful. And that's the case. You know, I really believe I'm sharper now than I was when I was in my 20s and 30s, at least mentally.
Well, the first question I'm going to throw at you is probably the same old thing. Central banks are dumping gold at a torrid pace. So, what is your answer to the many banks? And I'm not referring to the banks in the United States of America. I'm referring to banks not only in the United States of America, but banks like those banks in Europe and in Southeast Asia, including Tokyo and in Australia. What's your take on all this?
Well, first of all, banks are not selling gold hand over fist. If you said that 3 years ago or more, you would have been correct. A couple of years ago, the Swiss sold what they wanted to sell, and that was really the end of it. Central banks in the European group of under the Washington Accord, as it used to be called, they haven't sold gold in any amount for a long time. And we find that Saudi Arabia has just bought a pile of gold, and China's been accumulating it, and Russia buys it every day. And, during the last few years, big buyers have been Mexico and Argentina. And so there's plenty of central banks who are buyers, surprisingly. Recently, as a footnote to their statement that they thought evidently was going to be overlooked, the Bank for International Settlements, which is in Basel, this is the bankers' bank. And these are the people who tell the central banks what to do. This is a extremely important focal point for the Illuminati. And they said that they swapped SDRs, there's a special drawing rights that are issued by the IMF, supposedly in the form of a currency, and it's a fiat currency because there's nothing backing it. In fact, IMF rules say that they can't accept gold as a deposit. But anyway, the BIS said that they swapped gold for SDRs. And we don't know who they swapped it with. They did say commercial banks. Now, no commercial banks owned gold to be able to sell 340 tons of it. The only ones that could have been involved would be bullion banks, and there's only a handful of them. And that's J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, Citigroup, and so on. Now, it's my suspicion that the gold was probably, and it's a guess, sold for SDRs by a central bank. And I think the BIS is lying, which they usually do. The bank, in all probability, is Portugal, because the figure that they had of gold on deposit is the same as what the BIS say they accepted in return for SDRs. And so that was done 6 months ago. And Portugal's in no better shape now than they were 6 months ago, if not worse. And so I think that the gold was sold into the market during January and February. And so I don't think there's an overhang there. But anyway, central banks, generally speaking, are not sellers, they're buyers.
Okay, well, that brings us to the next question, and that one comes forth with the United States marked its third largest single-day debt increase with a $166 billion jump, spurring some concerns with the national debt. The question is, with such a big jump in a single day this last week, which was the third largest increase in U.S. history, and the sell-off of all this gold, supposedly, what does Mr. Chapman feel is happening to the United States as far as its power with the Federal Reserve and the world currency being dropped, meaning the United States currency being dropped as a world currency?
Well, gee, that's a mouthful. It's a great question. First of all, the internationalists, elitists, illuminists, all the same group of people, they have decided that the dollar has been so abused by government and business in the United States that it's got to be replaced. Their debt is colossal, and the other members of the international community that have dollars want to get rid of them. They really don't want to buy any more dollar-denominated assets. So with that said, the proposal has been floated that they'll use SDRs, which I just talked about, and they're not worth the paper they're written on. And the proposal is that all currencies will be graded versus this new benchmark, this SDR, sometime in the future. I didn't say when. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow or 2 months from now. But all currencies would be graded versus the SDR. And they would continually be graded. And they would be revalued or devalued dependent upon the situation. So at the beginning, the nations with the greatest debt would have the most degrading of their currency versus this SDR. And at the same time, there would be an arrangement made for default between nations, whether that would be 100% or 65% or what it would be remains to be seen. My feeling is that it would be 2/3 defaulted on with 32% left, so to speak. But we'll see. The point is, in order to form that currency, which would be used internationally, but not country by country, in that process, each currency would be given a value. Now, nothing was said about gold or silver. And incidentally, we cover this in the next issue of the International Forecaster. And just this year so far, the better currencies are down against gold. The U.S. dollar 13.2%, the Canadian dollar 14.4%, even Mexico was only 11-point-something%. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at currencies that are losing value in somewhere between 10 and 20% a year versus gold. And so they don't want to measure that SDR versus gold, nor do they really want to measure any currency versus gold, although others do it and they can't stop them. And I have those figures. Incidentally, I have all those numbers in Saturday's issue. They're in the form of a link. And all you have to do is open it up and you can see, who did the best and who did the worst. So, that's where they're headed with this thing. And it's going to be a disaster. Just like every other fiat currency has been a disaster. And I think that answers the question.
Oh, I think you did well on that.
Well, thank you.
My next one,
thank you, Professor.
I'm not a professor, but I do observe. And my next question comes around pertaining to the United Nations. And right at the present time, the minimum development goals out there are running rampant, with the U.S. Secretary General emphasizing the importance of stepping up efforts to achieve these goals through increased development aid and taxes, world taxes. And I quote him, "Under any circumstances, we must not balance the budgets on the backs of the world's poorest people."
So that means all the rich people pay the bill.
Correct.
And you happen to be a rich people compared to somebody who lives in Africa or in the jungles of Brazil or Southeast Asia someplace. So that's what they're talking about, and they intend to do that with a carbon tax.